Hello, interwebs, and welcome to the first episode of the Economics for the Rest of Us podcast. This is your host, Diphtherio. Now, there's a lot of talk about economics in the news these days, about things like trade agreements, Obamacare, and raising the minimum wage, but most of that reporting leaves out some very important issues. That's because journalism about the economy is usually written from the perspective of big business owners and executives. If you listen to the reporting about the economy in the mainstream press, you would be led to believe that anything that's good for the Wall Street banks is good for everybody. But what's beneficial for the Jamie Dimons and Bill Gates of the world isn't necessarily beneficial for you and me. Go figure. In fact, often it's downright harmful. What you hear on CNN, Fox, or even NPR is really just economics for the 1%. This is economics for the rest of us. Today I want to talk about the TPP, TTIP, TISA, NAFTA, GATT, and, quote, free trade, just in general. For those of you who haven't been keeping up on this, the TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a free trade agreement between the U.S. and a lot of South American and Asian countries. The TTIP is a free trade agreement between the U.S. and Europe. TISA is a free trade agreement focused on services. NAFTA, of course, was the North American Free Trade Agreement, and GATT was the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time debunking the conceptual basis of pro-free trade arguments because a lot of other people have already done that. Rather, I'm going to accept that free trade actually does what mainstream economists claim that it does and point out why that is a horrible thing for most of us. But before we get down into the weeds too much, let's start out with a few definitions, just so that we're all on the same page. First, we should define what we mean when we use the word economy as a proper noun. The economy. What is it? Simply put, the economy is a system by which a society produces and distributes the necessities and the luxuries of life, making stuff and distributing it. Those are the two main functions of any economic system, and it's important to keep that in mind. The economy is a tool that humans use to serve human needs. There are lots of different kinds of economic systems that humans have used throughout history to meet their needs. Some of them have been very unequal, very unjust, like the slave economies of the ancient Romans or the early Americans, while others have been relatively egalitarian, like the Indian societies of Northwest America. To the extent that we can judge economic systems, the only defensible standard to use is how good of a job any particular system does at providing the necessities of life for the people who use it. The economy has no needs of its own. It's only a tool. It's here to serve us, not the other way around. And let's be clear, not everyone in an economic system is going to have the same interests. What's good for the chief executive of a multinational corporation is not necessarily what's good for that firm's rank-and-file employees. General Motors moving its manufacturing to Mexico was good for the executives and shareholders of the company, but horrible for the American workers who lost their jobs. So whenever you hear someone say, that's good for the economy, or that's bad for the economy, remember to ask yourself, good for who in the economy? Too often, what is reported by journalists and described by economists as being, quote, good for the economy is actually that which is good for the people who sit at the top of the economic pyramid. An economist in the southern U.S., for example, before the Civil War, might have claimed that the emancipation of slaves would be bad for the economy. But of course, we all understand that that's only true from the perspective of the plantation owners, not from that of the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't damage the economy of the South. It simply changed the economic system in a way that damaged the interests of slave owners while advancing the interests of slaves. So two things to remember about this word economy. One, it's a tool here to serve people. People are not here to serve it. And two, the economy does not have needs or interests of its own. People within the economy do. Okay, the next couple of terms are going to be very important for our discussion of free trade today. Labor, wages, capital, and profit. Now, anyone who actually works for a living, whether that be as a janitor or a chief financial officer, is a laborer and receives wages in return for their work. Anyone who gets their income through control of material or financial assets, like owning a factory or owning stocks, is a capitalist, and their returns are called profit. Some people, like corporate executives, are both laborers and capitalists, since they often have large stock holdings as well as paying themselves unjustifiably high wages. A much greater number of people are mainly laborers, but receive a percentage of their income through small stock holdings in a 401k or a mutual fund. Most people in the U.S., however, are only laborers. 53% of Americans do not own any stocks at all. And of the 47% who do own stocks, the top 10% owns 81% of all of the stock assets. So it's not too far off to divide our population into laborers getting wages and capitalists getting profits. Now, wages and profits are inversely related to one another. That is to say, when one of them goes up, the other one goes down. This is simply because wages are a cost from the perspective of the capitalist, and any increasing cost will cut into profits at any given price level. We can think of the worker and the capitalist as splitting the revenue from selling their product after all of the supplies that went into making it have been paid for. So the more the worker gets, the less there is left over for the capitalist, and vice versa. So, what's good for the capitalist is often bad for the workers, and what's good for the workers is bad for capitalists. This isn't a radical position, by the way, it's just a fact of how our economy functions. One of the things that influences the relative levels of wages and profits is the abundance or scarcity of laborers and of capital. If you live in a place with lots of people but not many factories or industrial tools, the people who do own those tools and those factories are going to be able to drive a harder bargain with laborers and demand a bigger share of revenues than if you live in a place where factories are plentiful but workers are scarce. So the ratio between labor and capital in a country is going to have a large impact on what wage and profit levels will be in that country. This is where we get to the TPP and free trade agreements in general. One of the main points of so-called free trade agreements is to equalize this ratio across countries. According to mainstream, or what is called neoclassical economics, free movement of commodities across national borders is expected to lead to something called factor price equalization. What this means is that prices in both countries will converge to a common level. One of the main prices expected to equalize under a free trade agreement is the price of labor, i.e. wages. It is no secret to economists that free trade agreements should raise profit levels and decrease wages in the U.S. and other developed nations, while lowering profit rates and increasing wages in less developed countries. In fact, when free trade agreements haven't resulted in U.S. wages falling as much as expected, economists have been at pains to explain why not, and they go to great lengths to prove that wages are in fact equalizing as expected. In the case of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, mainstream economists expected that there would be a convergence of wages between the U.S. and Mexico, meaning that wages in the U.S. were expected to decline while wages in Mexico were expected to go up. That's right. The most commonly accepted economic theories predicted that NAFTA would lower U.S. wages. Most of us, as I've pointed out, work exclusively for wages. So how could any politician possibly convince a majority of Americans that NAFTA or any other free trade agreement is a good idea, when the expected outcome is to lower most people's earnings? Well, fortunately for them and unfortunately for us, they have economists there to assure everyone that free trade really is, or at least it can be, good for everyone. While it's true that some people will be injured by free trade and others will be benefited, economists argued that the gains of the winners will more than offset the losses of the losers. It is, therefore, possible in theory for the winners to replace what the losers have lost, and still be ahead themselves. Free trade, so it said, can therefore be a win-win. The neoclassical argument for free trade rests in large part on this assumption of net gain. It may even be true that free trade leads to net gains, although a lot of that depends on what you count as a gain. However, when it comes to actually implementing free trade agreements, the redistribution plans that would obviously be necessary to make sure that everyone actually does benefit from free trade are almost never discussed. We're told endlessly about the economic gains to be had by removing trade barriers. We're constantly having our heartstrings pulled by claims about how these agreements will raise wages and living conditions in poor countries. But no one ever mentions that free trade is expected to be bad for most of the U.S. population unless policies are put in place to capture the increased profits that U.S. capitalists will receive and redistribute them to everyone else who will be harmed. There has been one attempt in this direction, and I would be remiss if I didn't point it out. Trade Adjustment Assistance is a program put in place in 1962, and most recently updated by the Obama administration in 2014. It provides extended unemployment benefits and training programs for people who have lost their jobs to foreign competition due to free trade agreements. Some might say that this is a step in the right direction, but actually it's more of a distraction from the real issue. Free trade is expected to lower wages across the board for Americans, not just for those who are directly affected. When GM moved to Mexico, for instance, not only did all of their employees lose their jobs, but the people who sold goods and services to those workers suddenly lost their clientele. The local government suddenly had much less of a tax base to work with, and so public employees also had to take a hit. But while free trade policies cause wage decreases for large segments of the population, trade adjustment assistance is only available to those directly affected, and only for a limited time. Reduced wages will continue indefinitely, but government assistance runs out after just a few months. Another argument that supporters of free trade agreements make is that while reduced trade barriers may be bad for workers, they're good for consumers, since free trade is expected to lower prices. Average Americans, then, should support free trade since everyone likes low prices. But this is a specious argument since it glosses over the fact that practically everyone is both a consumer and a worker. What good does it do to be able to get your groceries for 10% less if your wages decline by 20%? Free trade apologists, however, encourage people to forget the fact that they work for wages and think of themselves simply as consumers. Of course, though, benefiting everyone has never been the intention of free trade policies, no matter what our economists, CEOs, and pundits would have us believe. The goal has always been to ensure the lowest wages and the highest profit margins across all countries. Free trade isn't good for the economy. That term is meaningless. It's good for a small subset of people within the economy, specifically those who get their income mainly through profits and not through wages. So the next time somebody tells you free trade will be good for the economy, ask them whether or not it's true that free trade will tend to equalize wages, and then ask them why anyone in a relatively high-wage country like the U.S. would support that. Well, that's it for the first episode of the Economics for the Rest of Us podcast. Hope you got something out of it, maybe learned a little bit. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section below, and we'll be back in a week or so with the next edition of Economics for the Rest of Us.